That being said, let's start off with the first movie, and that is the aforementioned The Card Counter. It stars Oscar Isaac, Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe, by the way, the movie is directed and written by Paul Schrader. I think Willem Dafoe has been in probably 99% of movies directed by Paul Schrader. I'm thinking of movies like Light Sleeper, Autofocus, Affliction, the list goes on and on. He has an important role in The Card Counter as well. Anyways, Oscar Isaac, he plays this, he's a card counter. He likes low stakes.
What's your name again?
William Tell.
I've watched you play poker, and I wonder why you play at such low stakes. You're a crackerjack.
I keep to modest goals.
Well, there's no reason for that. You need someone to stake you. An MTT makes $7 million to pay out.
That's what you do. You run a stable.
I'm always looking for a good thoroughbred. I can get someone to back you 100% on my word.
I prefer to work under the radar.
I thought you were a gambler.
Poker games, blackjack tables. He's very talented, but he does not want to call attention to himself. So he'll travel around America, just get into a casino, make $700 or $800, go to a nice dingy motel or just a ramshackle motel, pay his whatever, and then just move on to another town. Okay, everything seems very low stakes from him because he's an ex-convict prisoner. We're going to talk about whether we're going to get into why he was in prison in a second, because I've read reviews and they really reveal anything, but I'm going to let Eric and Bruce lead the way regarding what we should spoil or not regarding The Card Counter. The movie also stars, along with Willem Dafoe and Oscar Isaac, it also stars Tiffany Haddish as a woman who is in the card game as well, and she tries to hire Oscar Isaac to be part of her stable of card players, okay, where she and her company would get maybe 50% of the take, and the card players will get 50% as well. So, and then rounding out the ensemble is Tye Sheridan from Ready Player One. He's this mysterious youth who breaks up the monotony or the habitual existence of Oscar Isaac's character, and he plays another important role in the film. Let's start off with Eric Holmes, The Card Counter. This is a movie that we got under the gun. We maybe several hours even before, maybe like less than a day before taping this podcast. I wanted all of us to see this. First of all, are you a huge Paul Schrader fan? And what did you overall think of The Card Counter?
I wouldn't say I'm a huge Paul Schrader fan, but I do like him. He's kind of one of those guys that's like, he's never on the forefront of my mind, but whenever he pops up, I'm like, oh yeah, he's pretty good. And then, watch his movies. He mentioned Autofocus. That's when I need to revisit. That movie's pretty freaking cool from what I remember.
Do you want to hear my erudite and intellectual? I actually covered that press junket. Do you want to hear my smart question that I asked Greg Kinnear, who played, I believe, Bob Hogan in Autofocus? Okay.
What was the question? I loved you and dear God. And what was it like? No, yes, please.
Okay. Did you notice how Bruce didn't chime in and says, I don't want to hear this question. Let's get this thing over with, you son of a... I asked Greg Kinnear, so to study for the Hogan character, did you have to spend weeks and weeks or maybe months just watching porn? That was me years ago asking that question. Now at 50, like Bruce was saying, thank you, Bruce, for that birthday wish, I would have asked Greg Kinnear hopefully a more insightful question than did you watch porn to prepare for Autofocus?
Oh,
I mean,
what was the answer?
I forgot the answer. I remember I was just smirking to myself. That's what happens when you're in your mid-20s. You're a smirker. You smirk and you're self-satisfied. And then when you get older, as you will learn, Eric Holmes, as Bruce and I have learned, a lot of vulnerability and mortality.
That's actually a really good question. I really want to know the answer to that.
We'll get him on the horn in a few. But yes, what did you think of The Card Counter? You like Paul Schrader's work. Did this movie resonate with you as much as maybe I'm assuming First Reformed?
It didn't like resonate with me, but I liked it. This was so this movie got me thinking, and it got me thinking of things that didn't have to do with this movie. Like, we watch a lot of movies per week, so we don't get a lot of time to watch movies again and again and again, which is what I'm used to doing. I'm used to watching Boogie Nights 20 times, Gremlins 400 times. I'm used to watch, so on and so forth. This seems like a movie that under normal circumstances, like if we weren't doing this podcast and we're not supposed to watch like 5-10 movies a week, this is a movie that I would have watched like 5 times already. But as it is, I only watch it once, and I don't think I fully got everything from it, but I did like it. Tiffany Haddish. I haven't watched a lot of movies with Tiffany Haddish. Tiffany Haddish. I haven't watched a lot of movies with Tiffany Haddish. I've heard of her, but I haven't watched a lot of movies that she was in. She's great in this. I love her. Oscar Isaac's always great in everything. Was it Tye Sheridan?
Yes, Tye
Which
Sheridan,
I was confused with Taylor Sheridan. It's like, oh yeah, he wrote Sicario. Wait, no, he didn't. He's an actor. He played Cyclops. And then of course Willem Dafoe. They have that weird fisheye camera lens thing. Like this movie was really I don't want to say stylish. It is stylish, but it does it's weird. Like a lot of the tricks they're doing in the movie seems like first time filmmaker stuff. And this comes from Paul Schrader, who's been doing it since he's been in the game for a long time. So it's weird seeing him do kind of weird kind of camera trick stuff that you would see from a filmmaker making their first or second feature, but it still looked cool. I don't quite understand how and this isn't a knock on the film. This goes back to me wanting to, normally watching movies 5-6 times in a row. But there's some connection with him being a card counter and the stuff that happened in his past. And I haven't quite grasped what that connection is, but I think there's something there. But as it is, what I loved about the movie on first watch, it does that thing where, the character knows a lot about something and they're constantly teaching the audience what it is they know. In this case, it's counting cards. And every time they have a card counting thing, I'm like, I'm going to teach you how to do cards. And it's like, oh, that's cool. And then there's more than a couple scenes where he does like the little card flourishes. There's a word for it, and I can't think of it at the moment. And Oscar Isaac's not great at it, but I'm assuming he learned that for this movie. And, with the time that he had to learn his little card flip things, he did a pretty good job, I think. Overall, I liked it. I think this is going to be a movie that I like if I get to watch it 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 more times.
Yes, Eric, like you said, it's very value added. I know nothing. I know very little about card games, card tricks, card anything. But when he said always that regarding betting against the house on a roulette wheel, you have a 47% chance if you bet on red and black. I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna let that ride next time I'm at a casino, red and black. Bruce, Eric had some interesting things to say about watching this movie several times to get all the layers behind the story. How do you feel about this movie? Did it work for you on these different layers, or was it too preachy or too?
I don't really feel like it was too preachy. I'm kind of similar to Eric in that I guess I'm a little bit of a mild recommend on this one, but I had some of the similar reactions to it in that it's a little bit, it kind of holds you a little bit at a distance. I feel like I wasn't fully connected to it, and partly because of this kind of dual nature, and we're kind of dancing around it. I think it's good to dance around it, but there's basically, you think it's one kind of movie, this card counter, lifer, gambler, kind of has this, he has this kind of really regimented life after he got out of prison. And then he meets Tye Sheridan, and it kind of takes a sharp turn. And when you start discovering his past, once that happened, I was really interested in that, but it kept going back to the cards. And I think I kind of going with Eric on this too. The card thing, I think if I'm interpreting it correctly, it has something to do with him being able to control things or to use his intellect to control a seemingly chaotic world, which would kind of make sense based on his past and what he's trying to do. And that would also lead to the whole big conversation about tilting, which we're not going to get into, but there's an idea of how you can be controlled and all of a sudden your emotions can overrule you in a sense in that case. I think everyone was really pretty strong in here. I personally felt like Tiffany Haddish was kind of the weakest link. Just I've seen her almost all in humorous roles. So it was hard for me to take her seriously, but I think that might just been me and not her. You know what I mean? Like my brain is just used to seeing her in a certain way. There were some really interesting flourishes here too. Stylistically, we didn't talk about the fact that every time he goes into a hotel room, he covers everything in sheets. The lamps, the chairs, the tables.
I almost want to do a spoiler about that, but I don't get it. So, but go on.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that's like another example of him like controlling his environment. So I feel like the card stuff was a lot about control. I feel like the card stuff at a point had lessening payoff to me, whereas the other story I wanted more of. So I guess that would be my biggest complaint, is that I wanted more of the other story, a little less of the card story once we knew what the card story kind of meant. So
I just want to kind of add on to that. I think this is going to be one of those movies that, you know, those movies that come out and people are kind of like, Paul Schrader's a name that people know. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like if Paul Thomas Anderson, for example, comes out with a movie, everyone's expectations are at a certain place. And so when the movie comes out, it's like, it's not that good. But then you give it like 5 years, give it 10 years. And then everyone looks back on that movie. That was pretty good. Yeah. It's like everyone hated it I think this is going to be one of those movies that I think on first watch, a bunch of people might be disappointed, but I think the card counter is I think this movie's going to age well.
Yeah, I agree.
No. The card counter, I'm going to say this. So slight recommend for you, Bruce.
Mhm.
Eric, slight recommend, or you like it?
I would say pretty heavy recommend, just with that caveat, because we haven't said it yet this episode. I think this is going to be one of those movies that the more you watch it, the more it's going to pay off. And the older the more time this movie gets a chance to kind of settle in to the zeitgeist or whatever, I think this movie's going to, like I said, this movie's going to age well, I think.
The Card Counter is one of my favorite films of the year, hands down. Without I probably a top 5.
Well, you're ahead of the curve, so that makes sense.
No, I'm not. I'm tilting. I don't tilt that way. Trust me, I'm way behind the curve. But probably worst case scenario, top 10. But realistically, top 5. I love Paul Schrader as a filmmaker. You know what? As much as I love First Reformed, I prefer this over First Reformed. I love the pacing, the static camera angles that he uses, where it's usually just a fixed camera, and eventually, sometimes as you grow into Paul Schrader's work, for some reason it hit me. I love his visual compositions for this movie. It was very spare and austere, and I think First Reformed got me ready for this masterwork. I think both of them are, First Reformed and The Card Counter, are both probably one of Schrader's best works. I think he's on a huge roll. I'm very high on The Card Counter as far as the messages and whatnot. Regarding the cards, there's a lot of themes that are going on about what kind of prison we make for ourselves physically and emotionally, and also it posits the theory, what happens if the prison you literally make for yourself becomes your salvation? That's amazing. Also, there's all this stuff about the idea about no good deed goes unpunished, that I think that runs. I think it's like a recurring theme with Paul Schrader stuff, and also the idea of documenting one's life. You know, his Oscar Isaac's character is writing in his notebook about just lessons he's learned. And you're wondering if that's going to pay off. That Willem Dafoe character in Light Sleeper did the same thing. So there's a lot of reflective moments behind the Card Counter that made me think of Willem Dafoe's character in Light Sleeper. I also, which will, to Eric, to your point, and Bruce, to your point too, there are some frustrating moments for the viewer. There's a confrontation that is shot in a certain way. There is a card dealing thing that you're expecting if you're watching, if you watch The Cincinnati Kid, or if you watch all these other card movies like Rounders, you're expecting some kind of confrontation that way. And who knows, you might not get that payoff. The ultimate payoff behind The Card Counter, which it really reminds me of this one movie that I'm going to tell you guys, and we're going to probably agree about it after we're done with the podcast, but I can't really name the movie because I will be showing my hand. Okay. And I don't want to spoil it for you guys. Just know that, to Bruce's point, this is basically 2 movies for the price of 1. And if you don't feel that those 2 gel, it will be a frustrating experience. For me, I was on board right from the get-go. The Card Counter, again, easily one of my favorite films of the year. Highly, highly recommended. Bruce gets a slight recommend on The Card Counter. Heavy recommend from Eric Holmes. Eric Holmes also, even though he should give himself a little bit of credit, he's also ahead of the curve. He knows that he wants to see this a couple of times, and maybe he'll get different reads on the movie as well. Eric,
I should also mention that, Bruce, you mentioned that Tiffany Haddish was in better movies. I loved her in this. I need to see what other movies she's been in, because if she gets better than this, I'm in.
Yeah, serious. I'm so amazed at how much I love The Card Counter, and I was surprised. I was thinking there's no way he's going to top First Reformed. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but if you don't think he tops First Reformed, maybe at the worst, hopefully you'll at least like The Card Counter. It hits theaters September 10th.